He called her enemy. Then gave up his life to prove she wasn't asterisk. The sun burned hot over the red sands of Valduzinine. The sky was dry, dusty, and full of sharp wind. People from every corner of the alien world stood gathered in a circle. They had come to watch her die. Kelra, the alien warrior, walked slowly with heavy chains around her ankles and wrists. She was tall, with green skin marked by battle scars. Her long silver hair was dirty and tangled, but her eyes still burned like fire. Full of pride, she did not beg, she did not cry. She just walked, barefoot, leaving blood in her trail. Guards pushed her forward with electric rods. "Move, traitor," one of them hissed. Kelra kept her head high. Even as the alien crowd threw rocks and shouted at her, "Kill her," they screamed. "Let her suffer." In the middle of the circle stood a tall platform made of black stone. The executioner waited with a curved blade, sharp and shining under. The sun beside him stood the alien queen, her face hidden behind a golden mask. Kelra would die today for disobeying an order. They called her a traitor, but no one mentioned that the order was to kill innocent children. Far in the back of the crowd stood a human. His name was James Carter, a soldier of Earth's Republic. He had seen war, blood, and horror, but nothing felt like this. He had fought against Kelra's people before, but he remembered her face from one battle long ago. Back then, he saw her carrying a human child out of a burning house. She had protected the child with her own body, and then she disappeared. He never told anyone what he saw. He thought maybe he imagined it, but now, seeing her walk toward death with quiet strength, he knew it was real. The crowd went silent as Kelra was pushed to her knees. The executioner raised the blade. James felt something twist inside his chest. His hands shook. His heart pounded. He looked around. No one was going to stop. Not the leaders, not the guards, not the people. They all wanted blood, and Kelra. She didn't even fight. She just stared ahead, lips tight, back straight. She had accepted her fate. James couldn't take it anymore. He pushed through the crowd. People yelled at him, but he didn't stop. He stepped into the circle right between Kelra and the blade. "Stop," he shouted. The executioner froze. The queen raised her head slowly. Everyone gasped in shock. A human interrupting an alien execution. James stood tall, even though his legs felt weak. "She doesn't deserve to die," he said loudly. "She saved a human child. I saw it with my own eyes." The guards pointed their weapons at him. The crowd shouted louder, angry and confused. Kelra turned her head and looked up at James. Her eyes were full of surprise, confusion, and something else. Hope, maybe. The queen stepped forward, her voice cold. "You speak in her defense, human." She asked. She showed mercy. James replied, "She is not your enemy. And now she's not mine either." The queen gave a signal. The guards rushed toward James. They grabbed him, pushed him to the ground, and tied his hands. Kelra shouted for the first time, "No, leave him." But her voice was lost in the noise. The crowd was screaming, some in rage, some in fear. James was dragged away, his face bleeding from the fall. Kelra watched as he was taken for the first time. Her eyes filled with tears. The queen stared at both of them. Then she gave a cold order, "Take them both to the dungeons." She said, "Let them rot together." As the sun dipped lower, the crowd slowly left. The execution never happened. But something far more dangerous had begun. In a small dark cell, James sat chained to the wall. His heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the strange feeling he couldn't explain. Across the room sat Kelra, her eyes on him. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, she asked in a quiet voice, "Why did you save me?" James looked at her and answered simply, "Because you didn't deserve to die." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship yet, not trust yet, but the start of something. Something that could change everything. And outside, the world moved forward, unaware that two prisoners had just set fate on fire. The cell door slammed open with a loud bang. Cold wind rushed in as two guards stepped inside, their faces hard and unfriendly, without a word. They unlocked the chains from the wall and pulled James and Kelra to their feet. The chains on their hands stayed, but now a new one was added, linking the two of them together by the wrist. Kelra didn't resist, but her eyes narrowed with quiet fire. James tried to ask where they were going, but no one answered. They were dragged through long metal halls. Past flickering lights and rusted doors, the air smelled of oil and rot. Voices echoed behind metal walls, screams, whispers, laughter that didn't sound human. James glanced at Kelra, who walked beside him. Silent and steady. Her steps never slowed, even though her body still showed signs of pain and exhaustion. She walked like a warrior, even in chains. Soon they were shoved into a transport cage, the door slamming shut behind them. The floor hummed as the ship lifted off, engines groaning beneath their feet. Kelra sat in the corner and kept her head low. James sat across from her, the chain between them rattling slightly every time one of them moved. For a long time, they didn't speak. Only the sound of engines filled the silence. Finally, James broke it. "You didn't have to speak for me back there," he said, voice low. Kelra looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to stand between me and the blade," she replied. He nodded, touched the bruise on his temple, then smiled a little. "Guess we're both bad at keeping our heads down." The ship shook as it landed outside. The world looked even worse than before. Ash clouds hung in. The air and the sky was a dull gray color. They had landed on some remote prison planeta place where the forgotten were thrown away. No trial, no help, no escape, just dirt. Metal fences and cruel guards. They were pulled out of the cage and shoved toward a gate. Other prisoners watched. From behind fences, their faces thin, eyes sharp, no one looked friendly. James felt the chain on his wrist pull, and he turned. Kelra had stopped walking. One of the guards hit her in the back with a stun stick. She dropped to one knee but didn't cry out. James moved without thinking. Stepping between her and the guard raised the stick toward him, but Kelra caught it with her hand, yanked it, and snapped it in half. Everyone around them froze. The guards didn't say a word, just stared at the broken stick, then pushed them forward quickly, this time more carefully. They were thrown into a shared holding room, small and dim. The chain between them was not removed. Kelra sat by the wall, breathing hard. James leaned against the opposite side, wiping sweat from his face. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "You'll make them angry." Kelra looked at him, her voice flat. "I don't fear anger. I've lived with it all my life." James was quiet for a moment, then said, "They'll come for us now, harder than before." Kelra nodded. "I know," she said, "and we'll survive." Later that night, alarms blared through the prison. Gunfire echoed in the distance, and screams rose again. The ground shook under their feet. James looked around, then at Kelra, who had already stood up. "Alert? What now?" he asked. She moved to the door, pressed her ear to it, then whispered, "Raiders?" Before he could ask more, an explosion tore through the wall. Smoke and fire rushed in, followed by 3 masked raiders with plasma rifles. They pointed the guns at James and Kelra, then paused, confused by the chain. Kelra didn't wait. She pulled James down, rolled behind a crate, and kicked over a metal shelf, blocking one raider's aim. James grabbed a broken pipe from the ground and swung, knocking another one down. The chain between them made every move harder, every step slower, but somehow they moved together like they'd trained for this. When it was over, the raiders were out cold. Kelra checked their weapons, grabbed 2 rifles, and tossed one to James. He caught it, still breathing fast. "We're not going back in that cage," she said, voice sharp and clear. James nodded, gripping the rifle tightly. Agreed. They ran into the night, through fire and shadows. Behind them, alarms rang louder. Above them, red warning lights painted the sky. Their hands were still chained, but for the first time, they were no longer prisoners. They were fugitives, together. And somewhere in the heart of this burning prison planet, something had just begun. The desert was endless. Its sand was dark like ash, and the wind carried the scent of smoke and old blood. The 2 figures ran beneath the twin moons chained together, dirty, tired, but alive. Behind them, the prison lights flickered like dying stars. No guards followed, no ships chased them yet, but both knew that silence wouldn't last long. James stumbled over a sharp rock, falling hard on his knees. Kelra pulled on the chain without stopping. "Get up," she said, her voice cold. James groaned, wiped blood from his chin, and stood again. His legs were shaking, but he forced himself forward. They hadn't spoken since the escape. Not a word, only breathing, footsteps, and the sound of the chain dragging across the sand. Kelra had taken the lead, eyes sharp, always looking ahead. James followed her. Wondering who she really was, she had saved him twice now, once from the executioners, and again from the raiders. But he still didn't know what she wanted. Maybe she didn't know either. They found a broken transport ship half buried in the sand. It had crashed long ago, but its shell gave some shelter from the wind. Kelra pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped inside. James followed, coughing as dust flew into his mouth. Inside, it was cooler and darker. They collapsed on the metal floor, too tired to care about anything else. After a long silence, James finally spoke. "So, now what?" he asked. Kelra was quiet. Her head rested against the wall, eyes half closed, but then she said, "We keep moving until we find water." James nodded slowly. He looked at her, noticing the red burns on her arms, the deep cut on her leg. "You need help," he said. "I've had worse," she replied without emotion, but her breath was unsteady, and her hands trembled slightly. James reached into the pack they had stolen from the raiders. Inside were 2 water capsules, a small bandage roll, and a pack of dry rations. He handed one capsule to her. She stared at it, then took it and drank. "Thanks," she said quietly, almost like it hurt to say. He smiled a little. "That almost sounded friendly," he joked. Kelra didn't smile, but she didn't scowl either. That was progress. Later that night, she woke up gasping. James sat up quickly, looking at her in alarm. She was clutching her chest, her eyes wide. "No," she whispered in her alien language, "not the children." James reached out slowly. "Kelra," he said, "you're safe. It's just a dream." She looked at him, confused, as if unsure where she was. Then she covered her face with her hands. He didn't say anything more, just sat beside her, listening to the wind howl outside the metal wreck. When morning came, they started walking again. The desert was hotter now, and their feet sank into the soft ash. James kept glancing at her. Her pace had slowed. Her wounds were worse than she admitted. But she didn't complain. She never asked for rest. She walked like someone who had nothing left but survival. Then they saw it smoke on the horizon. Not black smoke from fire, but white smoke from engines. A human outpost. James recognized the style of the towers. The blinking signal light. "Help," he said. Smiling for the first time, Kelra stopped walking. Her face turned cold again. "That's your people," she said. "They'll shoot me on sight." James hesitated. "They'll listen to me. I'll explain everything," he said. Kelra gave him a long, quiet look. You still think they'll treat you as one of their own? She asked. He didn't answer. They walked closer, reaching. The edge of the sensor field, 2 armed guards stepped out, rifles raised. Stop where you are. One shouted. James raised his hands. I'm Captain James Carter of the Earth Republic. I request entry. The guard's eyes widened as they scanned him. Then the alarms began to blare. Subject is wanted traitor level priority. The scanner said, backup requested. James froze. Kelra didn't move. The guards aimed directly at them. Drop your weapons and lie on the ground. One ordered. Kelra looked at James. You said they'd listen, she whispered. James's heart pounded in his chest. I was wrong, he said quietly. Behind them, more soldiers arrived, surrounded now, no way to run. James stepped in front of Kelra. If you want to shoot someone, said to the soldiers, shoot me. The soldiers hesitated. Kelra pulled him back roughly. I don't need your protection, she snapped. Too late. He said with a weak smile. The commander of the outpost arrived. A tall woman in dark armor with a sharp voice. She looked at James. Then at Kelra. Take them alive, she ordered. They belong to the council now. Kelra didn't understand the human words, but she understood the look in the commander's eyes. It was the same look her own people gave her before they called for her execution. The same cold hunger for control, for pain, for power. James and Kelra were prisoners once again, but this time the cage looked cleaner. The chains polished, the lies more polite, and somewhere deep inside both of them knew this was going to be worse. The floor vibrated under his boots before he even opened his eyes. It wasn't a dream, not this time. Daniel blinked through the haze and saw dim red lights flashing along the ceiling. The room was shaking, not violently, but enough to remind him where he was. He wasn't in a cell. Not yet. But he also wasn't free. The air inside the underground lab tasted like metal and heat. Next to him, Thaya lay strapped to a narrow cot. Eyes closed, lips dry. Machines beeped softly around her. Thin wires connected her arms to alien medical ports. She wasn't conscious, but she wasn't dying either, at least. Not yet. Daniel stood slowly, his body stiff. His arms still bandaged from the outpost fight. They had brought them in alive, like trophies. But they hadn't asked questions, not one. Instead, they had dragged them to this hidden place beneath. The desert he didn't recognize. The Tekket wasn't fully human. And it wasn't fully alien either. It felt like something else. Something older, something secret. A voice crackled from the speaker near the door. Subject 17 is stable. Proceed to Phase 2. Daniel's fists clenched. He stepped between Thaya and the door. What the hell does that mean? He shouted. The speaker remained silent, but a hatch opened in the wall with a hiss. 2 masked figures entered, wearing medical armor. They ignored Daniel and moved straight to Thaya's side. He tried to block them, but one raised a device. And a pulse of energy hit his chest. He flew backward into the wall, gasping for breath. He dropped to one knee, coughing. The figures continued their work. Scanning Thaya, adjusting the wires, injecting something glowing into her veins. She groaned softly, her body twitching. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, but her gaze didn't focus. Daniel forced himself up and stumbled toward them. Again, stoppage, she's not your lab rat, he said. One of them turned to him and replied in a flat voice. She's not yours either. They left without another word. The hatch sealed behind them with a heavy slam. Daniel rushed to Thaya's side, holding her hand. Her skin was cold again, and her breath came in sharp, broken waves. I'm here. He whispered, I'm not leaving. She blinked slowly and whispered one word. Ship. Daniel frowned. What ship? He asked, but she had already slipped into unconsciousness again. His mind raced. What did she mean? Was there a ship nearby? A way out? He stood, walked to the corner, and searched the room for answers in the far wall hidden behind old crates. And broken armor, he saw a symbol, faded, scratched, but he recognized it. It was the mark of an ancient Terran Alliance vessel, long lost during the early wars. He pressed the symbol gently, and the wall shifted with a low rumble. A passage opened, narrow and dark. Daniel hesitated, then looked back at Thaya. He had to find out what was hidden here. If she was right, if there really was a ship, maybe they still had a chance. He entered the passage, the metal beneath his feet coated in dust after a few turns. The narrow hallway opened into a massive chamber, and there it stood silent, buried under layers of forgotten time. A ship, smooth and dark, not built by any known race. It looked asleep, almost like it was waiting. Daniel approached slowly, his heart pounding. The surface of the ship pulsed faintly as he reached out and touched it. Suddenly, lights blinked across its hull, and a deep hum vibrated through the floor. He stepped back as a panel slid open, revealing a glowing console. He tried to interact, but the ship's interface flashed red. Then came a cold mechanical voice. Unauthorized life form detected. Pilot DNA missing. Daniel cursed under his breath. Of course, it wasn't made for humans. He looked back toward the hallway. He needed her, Thaya. She had said the word ship for a reason. Maybe she was the key. Maybe this ship was part of her past, or her purpose. He returned to the lab, breathing hard. She was still there, still. Hooked to the machines, he grabbed a cart and began disconnecting the tubes carefully. If he set off an alarm, so be it. He wasn't leaving her again, with careful effort. He lifted her into the cart and wheeled her through the hidden hallway. As they entered the ship chamber, the lights reacted again, this time glowing blue. Daniel pushed the cart closer, and the ship's voice returned. Pilot recognized. Thaya of the Fallen Crest, access granted. Daniel stared in shock as a ramp extended and soft lights lit a path inside. He whispered, "You weren't just a warrior. You were something much more." Behind him, footsteps echoed in the tunnel they had been found. He grabbed her hand and pushed the cart inside the ship. The door closed behind them, just as gunfire hit the chamber walls. The ship hummed louder, and the engines flickered to life. But then the lights blinked red again. Launch sequence blocked. Core command required. Daniel looked down at her pale face and whispered, "You have to wake up, Thaya, or we both die in here." She woke to the sound of his heartbeat. Not alarms, not shouting, not pain, just the steady rhythm of life near her ear. Thaya opened her eyes slowly and found her head resting against Daniel's chest. She had been unconscious for hours, maybe longer, but his arms were still wrapped around her like armor. His eyes were closed, and his body trembled with exhaustion. For a moment, she stayed still, listening to that human heartbeat. It was soft, uneven, tired, yet stubborn. It didn't give up, just like him. The room around them was glowing. Soft blue lights pulsing from the ancient ship's walls. The air smelled of cold metal and burnt wires. And something else, hope. Maybe. She shifted slightly. And Daniel stirred. His eyes blinked open, slow and unsure. But when he saw her, he smiled. "You're awake," he whispered. She nodded weakly. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice dry and quiet. Daniel looked around as if trying to believe it himself. "Inside a ship," he said. "One I think was meant for you." She tried to sit up, and he helped her. The seat beneath them adjusted, responding. To her touch, a voice spoke again from the ship's console. "Core command authorization incomplete. Awaiting pilot directive." Thaya placed her hand on the panel. The lights responded instantly. Brighter now. "Directive?" the ship asked. But she hesitated, her eyes lowered, filled with something Daniel hadn't seen in her before. "Doubt. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore," she whispered. Daniel sat beside her, watching her closely. You're supposed to survive, he said. That's all that matters right now. She didn't respond. Her fingers curled slowly on the edge of the console. When I was a child, she began, they trained us to be warriors, not thinkers. They told us mercy was weakness, and feelings were poison. I believed it, she said, her voice shaking now, until I saw a human child crying in the ruins of a city we burned. Daniel didn't speak. He just listened, letting her words fall like quiet rain. I disobeyed orders to save her, Thea said. They found out, and I was marked. I thought dying would fix it, but you? She paused. Looking at him, you ruined my death. Daniel chuckled softly. Glad to be of service, he said. She turned away from him, and for the first time, he saw her shoulders tremble, not from pain. Not from cold, but from something else. Something deeper. A sound escaped her lips. Barely a whisper, she was crying. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as her body shook. Daniel didn't move closer. He just sat there beside her, letting her cry without interruption, not asking for her strength, not mocking her silence. Just being there. No one ever asked why I disobeyed, she whispered. They just called me broken. You're not broken, Daniel said. You're finally whole. She turned to him, her eyes red but clear. You still don't understand, she said. They'll never forgive me, and your people, they'll never forgive you. I don't need forgiveness, he replied. I only need you to choose. She blinked, confused. Choose what? Whether we run or whether we fight back. The ship's console blinked again. Waiting for her voice, her command, her choice. Thea stared at it for a long time. Then she stood up, her legs still shaking but stronger than before. She pressed both hands to the panel and said clearly, This is Thea of the Fallen Crest. Set course for Outpost Varnus. Daniel looked up, startled. That's the capital, he said. That's where they want you dead. I know. She replied, but it's also where the truth is buried. The ship responded instantly. Coordinates accepted, engines swarming. The floor began to hum beneath them. The soft blue lights turned to gold. For the first time, Thea stood without chains. And for the first time, Daniel saw her not as a warrior, not as a fugitive, but as a leader. They both knew what this meant. There would be no going back. But maybe, just maybe, they could go forward, together. The stars vanished as they crossed the line. There was no explosion, no warning, only silence. Like the universe itself had stopped breathing, the ship's lights flickered for a moment, then adjusted. A faint gray mist covered the windows, and outside, the stars were replaced by shifting shadows that moved like smoke underwater. Daniel leaned forward, staring at the display. We're in, he said quietly. Thea stood beside him, arms folded, her jaw tense. Forbidden Sector 9, she whispered. They used to send deserters here. The ship drifted deeper into the zone. No signals, no satellites, no transmissions. Even the navigation map flickered and failed. We're blind now, Daniel muttered. Manual control only ahead. A structure appeared out of the dark, a floating fortress with broken wings. It spun slowly in the void, untouched for decades. Thea pointed at it. The archive. She said, It's still here. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I thought this place was just a myth. She shook her head. No, she said. This is where they hid the records, all the war logs, the classified trials, the erased names. The ship docked against a cracked airlock with a hiss and a groan. The door opened into pure blackness. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and handed one to Thea. She took it silently. They stepped inside. Boots echoing on metal that hadn't been touched in years. The air smelled stale, cold, and full of secrets. Lights flickered down long halls, lined with rusted panels and old alien writing. Every step forward made Daniel's skin crawl. This place feels wrong, he said. It remembers pain. Thaya replied, her voice calm but distant. They moved deeper until they reached a large, circular room. At the center stood a tall column of glass and wire-sand ancient data core. Thaya walked to it and placed her hand on the control. It scanned her palm, paused, then blinked green. Access granted, a voice said. The walls around them lit up with moving holograms, old footage, documents, sealed orders, names appeared, some crossed out, some marked erased. Daniel scrolled through the files. His eyes widened as he saw footage of Thea's trial. But this version was uncut. It showed the council arguing, not about her actions, but about what she knew. She was a threat to our agreement, said one of the elders. She saw the forbidden orders, said another. Silence her. Came the final voice, cold and clear. Thaya didn't look away. She watched her own betrayal like someone reading a grave. Then she whispered, I wasn't the only one. They found more names, dozens of hybrid soldiers like her, erased, forgotten, hunted. Some had been executed. Others vanished. One file caught Daniel's eye. It had his name. He opened it and froze. What is it? Thaya asked. Walking closer, he pointed to the screen. They marked me 2 years ago. He said, targeted for removal. I just didn't know it. Why? She asked. He stared at the text, his throat dry. For refusing to carry out a cleansing order. They looked at each other in silence. Two soldiers from opposite sides, both hunted by their own. Both betrayed by their leaders. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the archive. The lights flickered, and the door behind them slammed shut. Someone's here, Daniel said, pulling out his weapon. Thaya moved quickly. Covering the side hallway, a low voice came from the shadows. You shouldn't have come. A tall figure stepped into the light, armor black and gleaming. A commander of the coalition, one of the men from the trial footage. You're supposed to be dead, he said to Thaya. And you were supposed to be forgotten, she replied. Her voice sharp, Daniel raised his weapon. What now? He asked. The commander smiled. Now you'd die for real. But Thaya was already moving. She rushed the commander like lightning, her body weak but her fury strong. Metal clashed, sparks flew. And the archive lit up with chaos. Daniel fired at a second figure in the shadows, striking them down. Thaya fought with everything she had, and in the end, she won. The commander fell with a groan. The truth still glowing on the screens behind them, bloodied, breathing hard. Thaya turned to Daniel. We have the evidence, she said. Now we show the galaxy. Daniel looked around the room, then back at her. Let's burn their lies, he said, and light up the stars with truth. They grabbed the data core and ran. The ship waited, the engines hot, and beyond the forbidden zone, the world was still watching. Still believing the lies, but not for long. The entire galaxy held its breath. Every major broadcast, every backlit screen, even the hidden channels in black. Marcasol played the same video. Not a speech, not a warning, but raw truth. Images of betrayal, voices of murdered officers, erased heroes, and secret orders stained with shame. The feed was shaky, glitching in places, but no one cared. Because the voices were real and the lies were breaking apart, Ray stood on the edge of a cliff above the rebel outpost. The wind howled like a warning. Below him, the signal tower blinked, sending the final wave of data across space. Beside him, Saraxa tightened her grip on her cloak. Her wounds hadn't healed completely, but she stood tall, proud. She had stopped hiding. They'll come now, she said. Ray nodded slowly. They'll come for me, he replied. She looked at him, eyes filled with something more than anger or pain. Something quiet and strong. We could run, she said. Ray smiled without humor. No, he said. We gave the galaxy the truth. We can't run from it. Behind them, the rebel commander approached with 2 guards. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. You did it, he said. Every planet is calling for investigation. Some want war. Truth always shakes the weak, Siraxa said. Ray stepped forward, holding out the chip that started it all. I'm done running, he said, but I won't lead a war. I just want people to know what really happened. The commander looked at the chip, then at Siraxa. And what do you want? He asked her. She didn't speak right away. She looked at Ray, then up at the sky. I want to stop surviving, she said, and start living. The wind shifted as ships appeared in the sky. Not enemies, rebels, survivors, witnesses. People ready to fight if needed, or stand if allowed. One ship landed nearby, different from the rest. Its symbol bore the mark of the old council. An ambassador stepped out, holding a white banner and a recording device. He walked toward them. With careful steps, Siraxa, he said, you've shaken the galaxy. I didn't do it alone. She replied. The ambassador turned to Ray. You, human, he said. Oh, you are labeled a traitor to your world. And yet, billions now call you hero. Ray didn't smile. Keep your medals, he said. Just fix what's broken. The ambassador bowed slightly. Then give us a place to start. Ray turned to Siraxa. She stepped forward and spoke into the recorder, her voice steady, simple, and true. My name is Siraxa, daughter of no one, soldier of no banner. I was betrayed by my leaders, hunted for my mercy, and left to die. But I lived because one man stood between me and the Rue. Blade. Now we both stand between the past and the future. Ray stood beside her, together. They faced the galaxy not as fugitives, but as flames, lighting the dark. Later that night, alone in a quiet shelter, Siraxa stood at the window. Ray walked up beside her. No more running, he said. She nodded slowly. No more chains. She reached out, and he took her hand, not as a savior, not as a soldier, just as someone who saw her for what she truly was, and somewhere far away. On planets once ruled by silence, children learned her name, not as a traitor, but as a warrior who lived.